years ago, you were both working in medicine or in medical school or in some capacity developing your trajectory.
Those are during our PhDs for drug discovery.
At that time, did you have any idea that you'd be heading towards psychedelic investigation and exploration?
I think I mentioned psilocybin in my dissertation. I definitely had cannabinoids in there. I mean, we were natural products chemists, so trying to optimize what nature has or discovering new compounds that can be used to treat a lot of anti-infective diseases, sometimes cancer. So we did a lot of actually microbial drug discovery, a lot of marine drug discovery. Jackie's been to Antarctica, trying to find new drugs down there as well. So nature
around in the snow with the shovel.
In the water, actually diving with you didn't dive,
no,
but
I didn't.
it's it's like a coral reef down there, and there's a lot of chemical diversity, and using what nature provided us is a great starting point for drug discovery. Obviously, we see what psilocybin has done. DMT is another natural psychedelic compound, and these are really the platform that we can use as scientists to leverage these into next generation medicines.
I'd say that, at least from the standpoint of psychedelics, a lot has been happening in the background for a long time. I can definitely say a big portion of it was chemists like us. And chemists never really stopped working with psychedelics. You have Shulgin, you have Hoffman, you have all of these chemists that continued to work with them for a long time. But I would say from a medical and more psychiatric standpoint in that side, there was a really large gap in data and in science. And so now, because we have all of this other sort of science associated with psychedelics, I feel like now the medical side is finally sort of catching up in the last couple of decades.
Chemistry and medicine are separate entities? Yeah. At the same dinner table or operating table?
Yes, unfortunately. So the chemists creating these compounds are not the ones that necessarily then work with patients all the time. So for a long time there was a little bit of a disconnect there, and I really think that in the last, especially, even 10 years, that bridge has started to bridge the gap again, which is great.
Obviously we're dealing in a level of consciousness and things that are very hard to quantify from a scientific perspective, but as long as you can point to some efficacy from, a patient standpoint, especially knowing a little bit about how the brain works and how psychedelics can change your brain and change your thought patterns, especially for depressed patients, and maybe it's addiction or other mental health disorders. Now we have a better grasp on it. I mean, back in the 60s and 70s, it was all anecdotal largely and not clinical data, which we're seeing now has a lot of promise in, the gold standard for drug development.
That might be an unsung chapter in this whole story, the development of the fMRI and the technology that's mechanically behind the spirit of the movement and the sea change.
Yeah, I would say that definitely in the psychiatric world, there's a lot of psychologists and psychiatrists and therapists that feel like they've almost been failing people a bit in the last few decades. They just don't, but not on purpose, obviously, just because they also only have so many tools to work with themselves and understanding the human condition. And so I think that this has really offered an opportunity too for revival almost for a lot of those people to think, wow, now I really maybe have something that I can see a difference in patients that they weren't really seeing with a lot of these other things like SSRIs. And obviously the opioid epidemic did not help either. Addiction obviously is everywhere all the time. So I think it's a huge perfect storm of lots of things in the last 30 years.
And public perception has changed. Holistic health, you look at cannabis, I think that was kind of a door-opening moment for psychedelics, and again, largely natural compounds with good safety profiles. They're useful for betterment of health, and I think that has played a role as well into this, changing of mindset, and obviously a lot of positive data helps too.
On the website, on the Psilera website, I see highlighted addiction, mood disorders, and neurodegenerative diseases as three of the targets of your efforts, right?
Yep.
So, as chemists, you're also put into the role as philosopher to a degree, right? Because when we talk about health and wellness, we talk about the human condition invariably, and there's so much that goes on to it. But I don't speak with enough chemists to know how much time they're meditating or philosophizing. If I see a psychiatrist or a psychologist, I don't know how much time they're meditating or philosophizing on the nature of the human condition, on the origins of suffering, on how much can really be transcended.
Yeah, I would definitely say that the psychedelics movement is dramatically changing how much time is being spent on that question, at least from my perspective. And we say that even from some of our collaborators and some of the academics we even work with and other people throughout the country, that they're starting to just ask questions that I should always be asked. But I think there was a couple of decades too there where everyone got very, very excited about pharmaceuticals and the potential of some of these new pharmaceuticals when we didn't really know what they were going to do. We didn't really know what the outcomes would be. And now that we're starting to be on the other side of it a little bit, we recognize that the path we went down of, well, here, let's see if we can throw medications at the problem, just isn't working.
Maybe the opioid crisis was one of the first publicly viewed red flags.
I think it was one of the biggest, for sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And some of the more deep questions that you're talking about from a philosophical perspective, or what is actually happening in the mind, I think that a lot more people see such unique outcomes with psychedelics that those questions are always going to be there. I mean, there's so much we don't know. So it's bringing up those questions all the time. And yeah.
It's bringing up those questions all the time because psychedelics in part elicit that kind of thinking.
Yeah, it's certainly, from a disease-modifying therapy, you're not just treating symptoms or masking symptoms like SSRIs or antidepressants do. You're actually figuring out and understanding the root cause of why you have these mental health ailments, whether it be addiction or mood disorders. And by doing that, you're actually healing yourself. Obviously, the psychotherapy portion helps. Cognitive behavioral therapy is useful, but I think drugs have a way of working together with the cognitive behavioral therapy. You have the neuroplasticity, the chemical changes in your brain that happen when you're on the drug, and creating those healthy thought patterns after that fact can really lead to a lasting impact. And that's what we're seeing play out with some of the data. And I mean, it is really exciting. I think, this is now the new revolution of mental health care. I think, SSRIs in 10 years aren't really going to be a thing. I think psychedelics are really going to largely replace them. You mentioned opioids. I think benzodiazepines are sort of that next potential epidemic, basically, for abuse. You're seeing, it's largely addictive. You gain a tolerance. There's abuse potential and overdose potential, especially with other prescribed drugs like opioids. And psychedelics can largely replace all of these. And whether it's something that you take every once in a while to have these lasting impacts, or maybe it is something more symptom management like a microdosing to sustain you on a day-to-day basis for things like anxiety or other mood disorders. I mean, what psychedelics provide is something that really not a lot of other things ever have. And we now have the tools to better analyze them, to better develop them. And whether it is, once a year, twice a year for the big, large psychedelic doses, or something more like a maintenance therapy. I mean, at the end of the day, whether you go to a pharmacy and pick up a prescription for that drug, or mushrooms are widely available, and LSD and MDMA, all of these things are going to be available to the public. And I think, we're seeing a new generation of personalized medicine, and I think that's here to stay.
Yeah, and I think it's important too for especially scientists to remember that translating everything you do to the public is so important, because if someone else is doing it, oftentimes it's very tough to always bridge maybe the gaps between vocabulary of kind of the average population and really intense scientific jargon, right?
Sure.
And so I think that when you have these sorts of conferences, it's still important for academics. I mean, you had, Robin Carhart Harris and Matthew Johnson and some of these other big ones here, but there are a lot of academics working on these things all the time that really don't have a way to get their information and data out to the public. And I think that's going to be an important thing to connect to, is having more and more of those people come to conferences like this. And as this gets bigger, continuing to have just that eclectic nature to the audience is really important. We work with a lot of people at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, the National Institute on Drug Abuse, University of South Florida is where we're based. So lots of academics working with us too, but they're not always the ones, showing up to some of these things. So I think it's important also to try to reach out to them.
Yeah, and two, I would say, we're all rowing the boat in the same direction collectively. We think psychedelics have the potential to change everything we know about ourselves, our relationship with others, with God and other things. So, having a collective thought platform or think tank like this is really helpful, and just people exchanging ideas. And obviously there's competition and other things involved with drug development or commercializing a product. But yeah, I think I was kind of taken back by just the diversity of people that are here. I think Jackie mentioned on our panel yesterday, you have shamans and drug development experts and physicists and business women, business people, obviously the banking and finance sector. So just having a platform where all these people can come together and share ideas and be like-minded is really helpful for the industry, and obviously portraying the right message, because we're now in a really unique place where we can control the manuscript, if you will, of psychedelics and how they're marketed to the general public. We are in a bit of a little bit bubble here, so we're all like-minded, but making sure that we can translate that message to the rest of the world.
Maybe this is something I've been trying to find the right words for, and you've touched on it for me here. A conference about medicine that a lot of people who like to party are also interested in attending.
Yeah.
And I keep trying to wrap my brain around any other time where I've seen medicine and talk of wellness be attracting such a diverse interest like you're talking about. It seems to be unique.
Yeah, I would definitely
certainly.
say so. I think there's a lot of practitioners and people on the medical side that know a lot of what they're doing is just not working. And I think there are a lot of nurses, doctors, surgeons that are starting to sort of come out of that shell of saying, well, this is just how we do things, and wanting to actually, discover a better option. So we've talked to quite a few, even nurses and other practitioners that are here right now, and just that's really what motivated them to even, show up or come or do these things, is because they're sick of sort of the status quo right now of medicine and how they treat mental health. So
Something I've always thought about is the notion of being empathetic and holding space for people around you. That oftentimes seems like a very pastel notion or a niche notion, but it's essential equipment, right?
yeah.
If we want to have a healthier society, and I hope that the goal overall in people's hearts is to become healthy, because a lot of the things we care about, I think we live in an addiction culture, a culture that fosters and monetarily profits from addiction, right? I'm talking about consumer technology and run the gamut, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Are our hearts capable of evolving this much in a short period of time, and will psychedelics help?
I mean, I like to hope so. I can definitely tell you from the perspective of even technology and social media and all these other things that have really boomed in the last 20 years. We have quite a few even investors we've come across at different times that said, well, I made a lot of money in the .com or maybe in Facebook or some other kind of social media thing, and now I feel terrible about it.
That's a real thing. You're really running into that. That's a sentiment. That's a realization.
We are, and they say, that's why I'm interested now in this space, is because I feel like I need to. Yes, exactly. It's almost like a guilty conscience, and it's a moment of realization and clarity, maybe of, wow, I really contributed to something that I don't believe in, and now I want to change that and contribute to something that I don't know anyone that doesn't believe in it, of any background, anywhere. And so it's at least deep down, and it's hard to. I don't know how that'll work as a society, obviously, as a whole. I know that even from maybe a social media perspective, it just really enables social anxiety, because you don't have to really have some of those interactions. You can hide behind a screen, you can do a lot of these things. So I think that makes it tough, because then you're losing that connection, right? You're losing a lot of what makes us human. And I think that as long as we're closer to embracing our humanness, which I think psychedelics help with, then a lot of that will
That's a core notion.
come
Psychedelics,
through.
as a chemist is stating,
Yeah.
that psychedelics can help with our humanness, help understand our humanness, help recognize our humanness, and that there's a positivity to that.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
these aren't just pastel emotions, right?
No, absolutely
These
not.
are rubber hitting the road, dealing with family dynamics, aspirations, reconciling with the past. Medicine can work
Yeah.
to help alleviate suffering and transcend suffering, not just medicate suffering. Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think, as Chris mentioned, we talk about it all the time because we've talked to a lot of people, obviously, and patients and things now at this point who have maybe tried different things or done different things, and it always does kind of come down to that moment of inner clarity where it was them almost becoming their own therapist. And I just don't know that there's anything more powerful than that. It doesn't mean that we can necessarily explain it on a molecular level exactly what in the brain is being hit where and what way, and so that's kind of our job now, right? Like we want to try to figure those things out, but we're definitely with this whole industry, we're starting from already kind of knowing some of the biological outcome and now sort of trying to work backwards, which is not always the case in pharmaceuticals in the last few decades. It's been, here's a compound, let's see what happens. And we have a lot of information. I mean, DMT was synthesized for the first time 70 years ago, 80 years ago, LSD, all of these, they've been around for a long time now. And so I think that it's time for us to start, I keep talking about bridging gaps here apparently, but chemistry, that's chemistry and biology now. It's like we need to really connect what goes from this chemical to this biological outcome or this person's experience or whatever else it might be.